You, Senator Madigan. Senator Canavan.
Thank you, Mr President. In a more unenlightened time than the one we live in today, people used to think of that there was a white man's burden. It was a phrase coined by Rudyard Kipling, that there was a burden placed on countries that were rich and prosperous to tell poor, unenlightened, savage-like peoples how to live their lives. And we've gone away from that concept. We've learnt and realised that that was a prehistoric way of thinking about the world, and we should let other countries, particularly those that aren't as lucky and fortunate enough as us to have the wealth that we do, to take care of their own lives, to take charge of themselves and not be subject to some imperial overlord. Well, we have departed from that concept, but we have a new form of imperialism in our country today. It's not a white man's burden, although it is the case that most environmental lawyers and green activists I've met are white, but it's a rich man's burden, that's for sure. It's a rich man's burden among some in our population that they think they need to tell other areas of our country and other people who live in our country how to live their lives and how to decide what to do in their parts of the country. And I say it's a rich man's burden because we know that many of these green activist groups are very well funded. They have a very strategic and detailed strategy to object to mining approvals, and it's funded. It's funded through donations to these organisations. Unfortunately, because these donations attract a tax deduction, we have very good data on who makes these donations and where they come from. And when you look at the ATO statistics, the last ones available for 2012-2013, you can see that around $500 million in the gifts or donations that receive tax-deductible status come from people with taxable incomes of more than $250,000. It's $500 million a year goes to charitable organisations from people who earn more than $250,000 a year. That was a full 22%, or nearly a quarter, of the total donations made in 2012-13, and people above $250,000 a year are in the top 1% of our population. So 1% of our population are providing nearly a quarter of the donations to these groups. It's even worse when you go a bit high. You can go up above people with above $1 million per year. They account, people on $1 million or more a year account for less than 0.7% of our population, yet they contribute 10% of the donations. And the average amount claimed by that lucky group, that fortunate group, to have more than $1 million, the average amount claimed was $25,000, the average amount claimed. Now, I don't begrudge people wanting to fund whatever they want to do. If you're lucky enough to have $1 million a year, good luck to you. If you want to fund Greenpeace or fund the Environmental Defender's Office of New South Wales, go for your life. If that's what makes your hair go back, I'm all for it. Go for it. But I don't think if you're on more than $1 million a year, you should expect then to get a tax deduction from other people, from poorer people, almost and certainly poorer people, because 99% of people are poorer than you, to pay for that luxury good. And funding green activism is a luxury good in this country. It's a luxury good that we are fortunate enough to be able to afford because we have enough money to play with these kinds of things. But when people are allowed to do this, and when rich people take it upon themselves to tell the poor people of Central Queensland, the poor people of Western Queensland what's best for them, people's lives are affected. They are affected when that money goes towards funding a campaign which is precisely and definitively targeted at stopping job creation and stopping mining projects, not about protecting the environment. These groups are not about environmental protection. They are about a clear and defined strategy to stop coal mines. Indeed, last night on Lateline, Tony Jones interviewed I think the head, or certainly somebody from the New South Wales Environmental Defender's Office, and they are the organisation that have taken the action against the Galilee coal mine in Central Queensland. They were asked if they were involved in developing the strategy document called Stopping the Australian Export Boom, and they admitted they were. They were there in 2011 at a retreat in the Blue Mountains west of Sydney to develop a strategy to stop Australian coal exports. Good luck to them. Good luck to them. I wish I could afford a retreat in the Blue Mountains more often, but if I did go there, I don't think I'd spend my time trying to stop coal exports. I'd probably find something better to do. But that's what they wanted to do. They wanted to stop coal exports, and they specifically state in that document that their first strategy is to fund legal action to frustrate and delay the development of coal projects. Now, the New South Wales EDO is also quoted in a story today in The Australian, where its Executive Director, Jeff Smith, is quoted as saying that his organisation did not use public money for the challenge, but rather it used community funds and donations. Now, those community funds and donations, as I've said, the EDO, the New South Wales EDO, is a member of the Register of Environmental Organisations, and being on that register means that donations to it are tax deductible. So people making these donations, including those that are lucky enough to have more than $1 million a year in taxable income, get a tax deduction for making a donation. Now, I reckon that might be classified as taxpayer funded in my view. I think if you're getting a particular status, a particular special privilege, and not all organisations get this, but if you get that privilege to be able to accept tax deductible donations, I reckon you might just have a little bit to do with the taxpayer in your organisations. And indeed, on the Australian website below this article, someone called Jason made a comment, and I may as well just quote him because he summed it up brilliantly. He said, "It's a bit of a bloody technical argument, isn't it? They didn't use taxpayer funds for this, but by using other funds, they freed up taxpayer funds for other brands of mischief. Seriously, things like this can only happen in a country that has bucket loads more money than brains." And certainly I think if we do have brains about this, particular threat to our future prosperity and future job creation in this country, we should do something about it. We should do something about it to put a stop to people in this country that want to abuse our legal process, to stop the creation of jobs and stop the investment in new projects in our country. Our legal system should be there to protect legitimate interests of people that are harmed, to protect legitimate environmental concerns under our Act, but clearly, the application of this particular strategy that has been dreamed up by environmental groups here is being done in a coordinated way, not to protect the environment, not to try and save the ornamental snake or the yakka skink in central Queensland. It's precisely aimed at stopping coal. That's why they're doing it, and that's an abuse of our legal process which should be stopped. So I applaud the government for clamping down on this, or proposing to clamping down on this particular legal loophole that is being abused by environmental organisations in this country. I also note that the government has established a House of Representatives inquiry into the Register of Environmental Organisations to look into whether that particular register is being abused, and I certainly think from the analysis I've done it is. I've spoken elsewhere in this chamber about the organisations on this register. There are around 600 on the register, and I did a relatively intensive look at around 100, just over 100, 108 I think it was, of these organisations, and I found that more than 80% of them have participated in protests of that 108. Half of the organisations supported divestment in coal and other fossil fuels, and around half were taking legal action. So around half of that 108 organisations that I sampled out of the 600, 40 or 50 odd, were taking legal action. They were using their donations to take legal action against developments that have been approved, simply to disrupt and to delay them. Around a shocking 12% of those organisations were actually involved in unlawful activities of some kind, that have been arrested or convicted usually during their protest activities. Again, I don't see any reason why organisations that engage in unlawful acts should be receiving the benefit of tax deductible status, and I hope this inquiry that's ongoing in the House of Representatives will conclude that the requirements of the register can be tightened so that we can better focus tax deductible status to those organisations doing practical environmental work, helping the environment, not running a political campaign to try and stop jobs being created in this country. And I want to reiterate, if you do want to run a political campaign, if you do want to stop coal and that's your driving interest in life, go for your life. You are free to do that in our democracy. You're just not free to ask for government funding. And I certainly hope also that the inquiry may look at whether or not access to these deductions should be tightened for individuals that are lucky enough in our country to have taxable income of more than $1 million or more than $250,000. I think if those people want to want to get their kicks from stopping development in our nation, well, they should fund that themselves. They shouldn't ask for the taxes that are paid by other ordinary working Australians that rely on these jobs being created to fund those flights of fancy for them. So I applaud the government's efforts, and I hope this Senate will seek to put jobs ahead of greens and frogs. Thank you, Mr President.